have an extraordinary adventure for you today, one that can be hiked or cycled, and follow in the footsteps of millions of people before you in the world's most popular long-distance hike, the El Camino de Santiago. While this hike started as a religious pilgrimage back in the early Middle Ages, it has often morphed into a more secular hike or cycle in the last few decades, where people are going not just to hike for spiritual reasons, but also as a hike for self-discovery, self-analysis, to get away from the chaos of everyday life, too much business, too much family, too much problems, and just take time to think. Get away from the internet and just spend some time inside yourself. This amazing trail combines history, culture, cute villages, food, beautiful historical cities, gorgeous landscape. You'll meet people from all over the world, everyone with the same common goal of working their way to Santiago. I am your host, Kit Parks, and welcome to episode 6 of the Active Travel Adventures podcast. Today we're heading to Spain to hike or cycle the El Camino. Can we start with you introducing yourself?
Okay, well, my name is Janet Handpeter, and I'm in my 60s, and I've been actually a lifelong traveler. I think I developed a passion for just international travel late high school when my mom and dad took me to Europe. But then at that point, I just loved to really travel abroad. But then I think over time, I lived in California. I moved to California right after college, and I was definitely getting into the sports world. I enjoyed a little bit of running and swimming and a little bit of hiking, and found a great group of friends. And over the years, we did just different things. And I think probably around 2001, I went with some of my good friends, and we did a hike to Mount Whitney, because I'm not your big camper kind of girl, but we did a 3-day Mount Whitney hike. And as a result of that, I developed some confidence. And so the next year we went to Peru and hiked the Inca Trail. And from that point forward, I love to kind of combine my international travel with some of the things that were a little bit more adventurous, that included kind of some outdoor sports that were hiking and that sort of thing. And I think each time you do something, you realize, wow, after you've trained and you've done it, you realize you can maybe add the next thing that's kind of adventurous, that's a little bit in your doable list. So I think that's how it started.
What do you get out of this adventurousness? Because there's a definite bit of uncertainty and uncomfort that comes along with it. So what are you getting out of it, Janet?
I think that's such a good question. I think it is really part of whether it's when I'm doing what I call my exotic travel, when I'm traveling around the world, whether it's a physical adventure or a cultural adventure, it's something that's a little more exotic, and it's a little bit outside the comfort zone. At the same time, it's just so exciting because it's something new and different. And I think my general adventuresome spirit just likes to learn and grow and to experience new things that I haven't experienced before. And the adventure travel piece adds into that, like, oh, wow, the opportunity to go to New Zealand and do some hiking in that beautiful scenery. When someone gives you that idea, you go, gosh, that sounds great. So I think it's just that I'm always ready to add one more new thing to my list that sounds fun and interesting and unique, but yet I know that I can do it with maybe sometimes a little bit of training ahead.
You do both kinds of travel, the regular cultural travel as well as the adventure travel. Do you find that it's easier to meet people on the adventure side as up to the cultural side?
I wouldn't necessarily say. It so much depends, I think, on who your travel partners are. It's actually meeting people is sometimes easiest. If you're talking about meeting the local people in a place that you're going, it's almost easier whether you're on an adventure trip or a cultural trip, is if you're traveling on your own, by yourself, or maybe with one friend. It's often easier to meet some of the local people as opposed to when you're with a formal group of people that you're already sort of your self-contained group and you're almost doing a lot of your socializing within your group. And that can be true whether it's a cultural trip or an adventure trip.
Today we want to talk to you about your adventure on the El Camino. Can you give us a brief overview?
Well, the Camino is kind of called the Camino, or really the Camino de Santiago. It's become quite well known over the last many years, and it's a pilgrimage route across the northern part of Spain that leads ultimately to the beautiful city of Santiago de Compostela. The cathedral there is where the bones or the relics of the Apostle St. James, which in Spanish his name is Santiago, lie. And so for over 1,000 years, religious pilgrims have been making pilgrimages across all of Europe to ultimately arrive in Santiago. So as a result, there's a lot of old kind of pilgrimage routes are called Caminos that all end up, there's different ones that all end up in Santiago. But the most famous one and I think the one that the majority of people travel on and the one that I did is the Camino Frances, or the French Way. That is around a 480-mile pilgrimage route that starts just in France, why it's called the French Way, at the beginning of the foothills of the Pyrenees. Within a day or two, you've actually crossed into Spain, and the whole rest of the Camino goes across northern Spain to Santiago. So that is the traditional Camino, and it's, I think, Madge and Kit, you have seen the movie The Way with Martin Sheen.
I've heard of it, but I actually have not seen it. No.
Well, I certainly recommend that to all the listeners. It's a phenomenal movie that came out in 2001, very beloved, and it's a fictional story set on the Camino. Martin Sheen actually walks it, but it's filmed on location, and the scenery is stunning. And as a result of that movie, a lot of the American audience, including me, learned more about the Camino and said, gosh, someday I want to do that. So that's kind of what put the idea in my head, is to walk part of the Camino.
I'll be sure to put a link to the trailer for the Way movie with Martin Sheen in the webpage for today's episode. This movie, along with several events that happened in 1987, increased the popularity of hiking the route. That year, not only did UNESCO declare it a World Heritage Site, but the European Council designated it the first European culture route. These routes promote the shared culture and history of the European integration. And last, but certainly not least, the immensely popular The Pilgrimage, written by Brazilian Paulo Coelho, reinvigorated the pilgrimage. This tale is part adventure story and part journey into self-discovery, and was immensely popular. Since Paulo's memoir is as much a guide to self-discovery, and that was one of the main reasons it was so popular, I'm wondering how much influence this book had on encouraging, if not welcoming, those that choose to hike this trail for self-development and self-realization reasons, as opposed to as a religious pilgrimage. I'll put a link to this book on today's show notes. What percentage of the people that you came across were actually doing it as a pilgrimage or as a more secular hike?
Which is a great question. These days, in the past, the people that walked it really were true religious pilgrimage type people doing that. Today, no matter what the reason you do it, we're all called pilgrims. But I think majority today that are walking it, there's certainly some doing it for a strictly religious reason. I think the vast majority are doing it for their own personal reasons. Certainly many of us are wanting to have some semblance of a spiritual experience, but at the same time, also just that opportunity to see the beautiful scenery, to have this physical challenge it is by walking that and getting a chance to meet people from all around the world. Sometimes it's a chance just to get out of your crazy busy life and take maybe 2 or 3 weeks for yourself, if you're walking just part of it, to get out in nature and have some chance to have some clarity in your life. So the multiple reasons, but these days it's really not as much, for most people, it's not as strictly religious, but for many people there's a spiritual component to it, which is quite different.
And most of the way is relatively level, correct? And often on pavement?
No.
I got bad info.
How about that? Now, what I will say is as I mentioned, the traditional French way, or the Camino, is the full way. If you start at the official beginning, is the 480 miles or 800 kilometers. But you can start the Camino anywhere along the way that you want. And so that most of the people, a few start actually at the beginning, but many start somewhere along the way. I myself chose to do a half Camino. So I started kind of at a halfway point and walked the last 230 miles myself.
If someone only has a week's vacation, where would be a good starting point?
The good place to start for that is the town of Saria, which is Sarria. And now, when you walk the Camino, when you arrive in Santiago, if every day you have a pilgrim's passport that you have stamped every day in the city or the town where you're lodging that night. And so when you arrive in Santiago, you go to the pilgrim office and you're able to then prove that you were a pilgrim and that you can get a certificate of completion, or that's the Compostela. Now, the reason I say that is that to get that certificate or Compostela, you have to prove that you have walked at least the last 100 kilometers of the Camino, which is it's 60 miles. And so the starting town where many, many people start their Camino because they only have a short amount of time is you start in Saria, because that's the first really big town. It's 110 miles away from Santiago. So that's a good place. It can take anywhere from I was in good shape by the time I got into Saria, so I was able to do my Saria to Santiago in 5 days. I had good friends that just returned from walking the Camino starting in Saria, and they did 8 days. They did a slower version because she had some injuries. So that's a good place for getting a taste of the Camino in just 1 week.
It's important to get your credencial, your pilgrim's passport, along the way, and to get it stamped along the way, because those stamps show that you are actually a pilgrim, and that enables you to stay in the inexpensive hostels. You can buy a pilgrim's passport for just a couple euro at the tourist office and many churches and hostels. What's the significance of the scallop?
The scallop shell is back again when the pilgrims were walking. They would walk to Santiago, and then it's about another 3 or 4 day walk, about 70 miles or so, to actually arrive out at the ocean. And the town there is called Finisterre, which means end of the land or end of the earth. And back, centuries ago, when the people didn't know the globe, they truly believed that end of Spain, or when you ended out in the ocean, that was the end of the world. And so they would go out to the ocean, get a scallop shell, and return back. And so that really became sort of the symbol for the Camino. And now all of us pilgrims pick up a white Camino shell at the beginning of our Caminos and wear it on our backpacks. And that kind of helps show that we're a pilgrim, as well as the fact that we're all carrying big backpacks. So that's kind of a giveaway, and that we have hiking boots and we look a little disheveled.
Many liken the fan-shaped spines of the scallop shell, all pointing to the base, as representations of the different hiking trails that lead to Santiago. There are 4 main routes: the French way that Janet did, also the Portugueso way, coming through Portugal, the Primitivo, which is the oldest established route, and then the Norte through the Basque. That's the hardest route. As Janet mentioned, the French way is the most popular route. The scallop shell is the symbol of the trail. Not only do all the pilgrims actually wear a shell, but along the route you'll see symbols of the scallop shell to tell you which way to go. Tell us about the villages you go through.
There's so many things that are special about the Camino. It really is an amazing experience, is that you are walking through existing Spanish countryside and Spanish towns, Spanish villages. And so you're walking through normal daily life that the actual Camino route happens to go through. So you're getting to not just, what's great about it, it's not just a hike in the woods where you don't see anybody for a long time. You're actually sometimes in the woods, and sometimes you're walking through little villages or even big cities. And so you're getting to see everyday Spanish life. And some of the villages are very small and charming. So the one main road of the Camino is, the actual paved road that goes through the town, and you're just seeing the villagers and daily life. And when you're in the Galicia region, which is the last area, and Santiago is also in Galicia, it's kind of cow country, and it's green and lush and a little bit rainy, and it's filled with pastures and cows. And so you're going through villages with, it's just kind of rural life as well. But then you've got beautiful big cities like León, and with gorgeous cathedrals and things to see. So there's just always something new and unusual to keep you interested as you're doing your walk.
What kind of age groups did you see along the way?
It's amazing. It's truly the cross-section, and I think a lot will depend on what time of year. The summer times the Camino over the years has become more and more popular and more crowded. I think the last year or so, over almost like 280,000 people completed the Camino from one of the different Caminos, ended up in Santiago. So it's become very popular. And the summer times are really, from what I hear, I don't recommend going in the summers. July and August are extremely crowded, because then a lot of the Europeans are on summer vacations, including a lot of the Spaniards. And so it really gets filled up with people, and probably a lot of younger people. But the rest of the time, I was walking in September, October, and also kind of May, June. So the shoulder seasons of late spring, early fall are really good times to walk. And so my experience is probably typical for the shoulder seasons. And you're still seeing people of all ages. But what was nice is being a 50-plus person, there were large numbers of people that were 50s, 60s, and 70s walking the Camino. And in fact, a lot of my Camino friends were absolutely in that age group. So it's heartening because I think part of it is the Camino. If you're walking even a half Camino or even the last 2 or 3 weeks, you have travel time to and from Spain besides actually walking the Camino. That ends up to be a significant amount of time off. So it's hard often for working people that have 2-week vacation a year like we do in America to take off a lot of time to walk the Camino. So it often is people that have a little bit more discretionary time, and that often means they're a little bit old.
Tell me about some of the people you met along the trail.
Another one of the great joys of the Camino is the fact that you get to meet both the locals, and I'll talk about that in a minute. Get to know some of the local people, particularly the ones that are running your lodging, but then you're meeting fellow pilgrims, and they are from all over the world. It is like United Nations walking, and you get to meet friends from all over. What I found is the countries, the pilgrims are made up of, a lot of the European countries. So certainly you're meeting a lot of Spaniards, a lot of Germans, a lot of French, and then like from England, UK, and Ireland, and then a smattering of the different other European countries. There was also quite a few Americans, many Canadians. I also had friends from Australia, New Zealand, Poland I met. There's a lot of South Koreans these days walking. So it's fun just to find out where people are from. And I think kind of a story, I was really lucky on my first evening, my first day as a pilgrim. That evening I was staying in one of the pilgrim hostels, and I'd met a lovely woman I was walking with during the day. And so she and I went down to dinner at our albergue, the hostel, and joined another group of 4 people at the table. And they ended up, the 6 of us laughed and giggled for 2 hours. We had so much fun. And for the next 2 or 3 days, I walked a lot with this particular group. And it was 3 guys, 3 good guy friends that have been walking the Camino every year for a few weeks together. And then another woman, Camilla from the UK, was a nurse midwife. And so they were in their 50s and probably early 60s. And we just got along, and we had some deep friendships. And I'm still in contact with at least 2 or 3 of them. So it's a real treat.
I find I bond more quickly with the people I meet on the trail versus those that I meet in real life. Do you find that as well?
Absolutely. You're so true. I think you're right. When you're doing an adventure trip of any type, part of that question, when you're meeting somebody on the Camino is, well, hi, what's your name and where are you from? And then really the third question is, why are you doing this? Because, not everybody is going to do these adventure trips, and not everybody's going to walk the Camino. So when you're talking to a fellow person going, what made you decide to do this? There's a natural bond, as you're saying, Kit. It's absolutely true. That takes a lot of guts, and it takes a lot to commit to doing a multi-day walk and carrying a backpack and doing all the things and preparing that it has. It really shows that somebody took some real initiative, and you absolutely do have a real bond. Your conversations are generally deeper. They're not as superficial, because when you're on these type of trips, you are who you are. You're no pretense. You don't have makeup on. You really get a chance to be authentic. And I think the relationships are just deep and genuine and really caring and compassionate. And certainly what we find is the pilgrims, there's a real deep pilgrim community. We're all in this together. We're all pilgrims, and everyone's out to help everyone else, give some advice and, how's your blisters? Here's what I can, here's some things I can tell you. Or, gosh, I heard about this great hostel. This is something you should do if you're going to that town. I heard it's a great place. So you're doing a lot of sharing back and forth.
I know not every day is going to be lollipops and rainbows. Did you have some days that you thought to yourself, why on earth am I doing that? And do the people along the trail, the fellow pilgrims, do you help each other out?
I had been blessed with, before I left on the Camino, one of my closest friends had done the full Camino. Again, I did the second half. She did the full Camino just 5 months before I did. And so when she returned home, I knew that she was going to be my mentor, and she was. So I was incredibly prepared for what to expect from all of her great advice. And one of the big pieces of advice that she gave me, which I continue to pass on to everyone, is that when you're walking the Camino, it's really not a race, it's a journey, and that your pace is your pace. There's no right way to do it. You don't have to go the certain number of kilometers every day. And then in fact, really the injuries that people get with blisters and tendonitis type of injuries are those that go too fast or too far. And so I took that to heart from what she had told me. So I actually took it really easy. And so my days, every day I averaged just 20 kilometers a day, which is 12 miles. And so my pace, I took an easy pace. I would stop for take pictures. I took breaks. And then my mileage wasn't that huge. And so as a result, my body never broke down. And so I didn't end up needing a rest day because I ended up having a few short days. Now, if I had pushed it like a lot of pilgrims do, I think I would have had some days where my body was rebelling. And so that very much happens where pilgrims may need to take a day or two off because they've pushed too hard and their body's telling them to slow down. But without question, whatever you're dealing with, there's pilgrims all around you. You're staying in pilgrim hostels and they're there to encourage you. There's in fact the hospitaleras. These are actually the volunteers that run a lot of the pilgrim hostels. They're experienced Caminos. Many of them have walked the Caminos in the past. They're now back to serve for maybe a 2-week or a 4-week volunteer stint. And they know about the pilgrim life and they know about injuries and blisters, and they are there to support, encourage. So it's an incredible, encouraging family. So yes, if you're having bad days or there's always somebody around to support you and help you and love you. So it's amazing. There's probably not an environment as supportive as this. It's truly this unique spot in the world.
In case you're multitasking while listening to this program, I want to stop just for a minute and emphasize something that Janet just said about hiking your own hike. Doing your own pace is super important. I remember a time when my girlfriends and I were doing a section hike on the Appalachian Trail, and so many, mainly the young people out there, are all in a competition to try to see how many miles they can do each day, and they're trying to bang out 20 and 30 miles, but they're missing the trail and they're missing the point. The guidebooks all have cute little detours that they talk about, and one in particular always struck me about that trip was there was a gravestone from a hermit, an Uncle Nick Grainsby or something like that, and on this stone it says, "He lived alone, he suffered alone, and he died alone." It's 30 feet off the trail. It was a cool historical gravestone, and not one person that entire afternoon, even though dozens upon dozens of hikers walked right by the gravestone, stopped even to take a look. They were so much in a hurry to get as many miles as they could that day. I just think that's sad. So I just want to emphasize and encourage you to hike your own hike, go at your own pace, and you're doing this for reasons other than clocking in the miles. Let's shift gears for a minute. Can you tell us, please, about the accommodations and in particular about the hostels?
First, let me just tell you about kind of the pilgrim hostels and then the other options. I stayed probably 2/3 of the time in the pilgrim. I called them the pilgrim hostels. They're in Spain. They're called albergues, and there's a wide variety of them. But generally, what that does mean, it is accommodations that are only for pilgrims. You have to show your pilgrim passport to get in. And they're generally co-ed dorm rooms with bunk beds, and they provide mattress, pillow, and blankets. And so you'd need to bring your own sleeping bag. And the rooms can vary. There can be one big room with maybe 50 bunk beds for 50 pilgrims in it, or it can be 10 different rooms where maybe there's only bunk beds for 8 people per room. So it really varies, but you're generally sleeping in this kind of co-ed environment. And then you have your bathrooms. Occasionally they're co-ed, of course, with the shower stalls are closed, etc. But many times I was surprised, actually pleasantly surprised, there's a separate men and women's bathroom. And they're lovely. And actually, and these days there's so many different types of albergues, and more of them are privates, which means they're privately run and operated, often by families, often fairly newly opened, and really done very lovingly. And I was amazed at how modern and clean and how well set up they were for pilgrim needs. The other kind of advantage of that is you get a chance when you're staying in the pilgrim hostels. You get a chance to make many new friends. You might be eating your meals there for an extra fee. They will offer dinner. And so you make some really nice friendships at the hostels as well. Now, occasionally some of the albergues, particularly the private ones, do have sometimes a couple of rooms that are private where you can actually you can be staying at the albergue, but you've got your own room and maybe even your own bathroom, which is a lovely thing. So you can upgrade. And I've done that a couple of times. Those, of course, as you can imagine, go pretty quickly. But then the next kind of level up, and places where I stayed quite a bit, were the pensiones. And that is just one level up where, in fact, then it's not quite as fancy as a real hotel, but it's more kind of like a B&B, where you've got your own room and you've got your own room, which is great, and then you've got your own bathroom or maybe a shared bath with one other room. And those were a little bit, maybe 3 times as much money, but still very reasonably priced. So I would vary. At times I would do the Pilgrim hostels, and then a couple of times, maybe every 4th day, I would book a pension so that I could have my own room and have a little bit of privacy and be able to have a lights out time that was on my own time and not with the dorms.
Logistically, how do you handle laundry?
You become really good. Your life really as a pilgrim is walking, eating, drinking, sleeping, and doing laundry. Those are kind of your 5 main duties. So it works out that particularly the pilgrim hostels and really even the pensiones that deal with pilgrims are well set up. They've got really good laundry areas. Even more and more actually these days have washing machines, washing machines with paid, so you need to put in your coins. And often with that, we'll have dryers. But all of them have the laundry area. So they've got a washing area with big, bins where you can wash your clothes, and then big laundry lines where you hang them outside. I only used the washing machines one time because it was just a house. You have to keep going back. And I generally almost always just hand wash my clothes. And that's the first thing you do when you get in from the earlier middle afternoon when you arrive after walking that morning. You get to your room, you get to your bunk, you unpack, you head off to the shower immediately so then you can put on your clean clothes, and then you head off to do the laundry of the dirty pair that you just wore that day. And you want to get it on the line by the latter afternoon so it has time to dry in the sun before getting up the next morning. So it worked out really well. You learn when you go that you're taking clothes that are very much easy to wash and dry quickly.
Bringing the proper clothes is super important. You want to stick with the synthetics that they sell in the outdoor sports places like REI or online or wherever you choose to shop. Avoid cotton. It does not dry quickly. And if you get cold, they have a saying, cotton kills, because it does retain that moisture and you want to be able to dry out as quickly as possible. If you see me in most photos, I'm wearing almost the same attire. I just replace it as needed. It's one of those long sleeve shirts, which is also great to keep the sun away, that you can roll up to short sleeves, and the zip off pants. If I get drenched, they dry out almost instantly. So that's why I wear them all the time. I just love them. Wool is also another nice option because it does keep you warm even when wet. So, Janet, tell me, when you look back on this adventure, what's your favorite memory?
It's so hard. I don't think I really have one. It's like each day was special. Each day the scenery was beautiful. Each person I met, so many pilgrims I met were just so special, and interactions with them. I mean, I could probably sit down and give you 50 of them. So I can't say one really stands out above the others. It was honestly the composite of just every day. It was experience after experience after experience. I had to journal every night just so I could try to remember it, even though I was taking pictures as well. You're just so filled with just amazing memories and just heartfelt experiences, the pilgrims you meet and the locals you meet. So no, I mean, I think getting into Santiago and knowing that you're finally arrived in your destination city, for me after 19 days, that was like, oh my God, I'm finally here. And being able to be in the church service, because they have the famous thing when you're in Santiago at the cathedral, they have a pilgrim's mass twice a day at 12 noon to 7:30. And so it's filled with pilgrims. We've come from all the different Caminos, and it's our first day, or maybe we arrived the day before, and we're just sitting through a traditional Catholic mass, and you certainly don't have to be Catholic to appreciate it. And just you're here in this famous, just beautiful spiritual cathedral, and it just feels like such a culmination of all the effort that you've done, and like, wow, I've really done it. I am a pilgrim.
In case you're wondering why St. James is buried in Spain, it was St. James who brought Christianity to the Iberian Peninsula, and after he was beheaded in Jerusalem, they brought his remains up to Spain in 44 AD. The tomb was abandoned in the 3rd century, but rediscovered in 814 AD by a hermit who saw some strange lights in the night sky. The bishop recognized this as a miracle and told the king, who then ordered construction of the church on that site. and it's said that the king was the very first pilgrim. Tell me this, Janet. I have this image of people hugging complete strangers when they finally complete this trail.
Oh, it's absolutely. Yeah. I mean, once you're you know who else is a pilgrim. You may not know them personally, but absolutely, when you're in the main plaza in front of the cathedral as you've just arrived, and everybody's got their hands up and in celebration and getting photos taken, you're just congratulating each other. You may not have ever seen them or know them, but you have this shared experience that you can really appreciate what they've done and what an accomplishment it's been, whether they've walked for 7 days or 20 days or 42 days. It's still an amazing accomplishment.
Arriving at the church has special meaning for those that have hiked for religious or penance reasons. You'll find that on the years that St. James Day, which is July 25th, falls on a Sunday, it will be especially crowded on the trails because that year has been declared a holy year or a jubilee year of special indulgences or special forgivenesses. The next time St. James Day falls on a Sunday will be 2021, 2027, and 2032. You'll see a tremendous spike in the crowds those years. Of the multi-day treks that you've done, how does this hike compare to those, and which ones are you comparing them to?
I know I'm always getting asked because I travel a lot, and people ask, well, what's your favorite trip? And I say, well, it's like asking a mother or father with 6 kids, which was their favorite kid. You can't. They're each wonderful and unique. Well, I guess I might compare to Nepal, my 9 days trekking in Nepal, which was equally special and fabulous. Both places you've got just gorgeous scenery. Of course, the scenery is very different. I think in the Camino, the variety of the scenery, as I mentioned, starting halfway, I had everything from the flat meseta, where I started in the middle of the Camino, which is the meseta. It's a flatter area, but then you head up into the mountainous, hilly region again, where everything's green and lush. And so you have such variety of scenery, like as mentioned, the little villages, the big towns. So that part, the Camino just offers, you never get bored because the scenery is always changing. So that's one thing that's very special. And the fact of it, you're really doing something. You're part of history. You're walking on this pilgrimage route that has been walked by pilgrims for 1,000 years. So there's a piece that you're really connected to something bigger than yourself, which I think makes it so special. And I think another piece is the fact that it is such a multi-day. It's even way more than the 9-day Nepal trek. It's that for me, I was walking 19 days, which is, that's like, wow, almost 3 weeks. That makes it such an accomplishment where it's just day after day, and the time goes so quickly you can't even believe at the end. You're going, my God, I've almost been doing this 3 weeks. Where did the time go? That is a special aspect and kind of a feeling of accomplishment. And then the fact that I did carry, like many, many pilgrims, I did carry my own backpack. And so that's a huge challenge in itself, is being able to pack everything that you need for your 19 days or longer in just your backpack, and to try to keep it under 20 pounds. And that includes 2 pounds worth of water. So that's a huge challenge. And knowing that you're carrying this day after day over terrain, from flat terrain up a mountain. We did have one mountain, Osabrera, was the day it was a 2,000-foot elevation gain. And I carried my backpack up that mountain, and it actually was okay. So it's all of those pieces. And then I think the international aspect of meeting pilgrims from around the world, like I mentioned, all of those combined to make it just such a unique experience that's unlike anything else. And that it's a real physical, it's a physical, mental, emotional, and spiritual challenge to do something that's unlike anything any of us have ever done before. You're really outside your comfort zone at times, but luckily you're in such a supported environment of the Camino where, in fact, any of your needs, there's going to be somebody around that can help you. So that part makes this challenge doable because you are being supported. So all of those together, I think, is what makes it so incredibly unique, incredibly special.
On a scale of 1 to 5 for difficulty rating, where would you put this if 5 is the hardest?
I would put this at a 3 or a 4. And that would depend, as mentioned, the Camino is great. Everyone can plan the Camino that's right for them. So you can start at, quote, the beginning of the French Way and do all 480 miles, or you can start at Saria and do the last 70 miles. So that gives you that option. And then you can carry your own backpack like I did and many pilgrims do, but you can also, there's excellent services where you can actually ship your backpack. If you've got a 20-pound backpack and maybe you're just not strong enough or you've got some injuries, you can ship your backpack ahead every day to the lodging where you're going to be staying that evening. So that takes a huge, not only weight off your back, but that I think makes it a little bit more manageable. So, if you're walking the whole Camino and you're carrying your own backpack, it's probably a 4. If you're doing a smaller amount of it and maybe you're shipping your backpack ahead during some of the hard sections, sometimes pilgrims, in fact, would carry their own backpacks, but if they were hitting a day with a really lots of uphills that was going to be really big, or even some tough downhills, they would ship their pack ahead. Or that they would sometimes do that when they maybe had some injuries they were trying to recover, they would give themselves a break for a few days. So knowing you've got that option of the backpack being shipped ahead and only carrying a day pack, that helps lessen some of the stress on your body. So I'd say it's generally a 3 and could be up to a 4 if you're really doing the whole thing.
Do you have to book your accommodations in advance, or can you get away with winging it?
I was a little surprised. Again, I started in mid-September, and I'm thinking that things would be a little bit better. But the fact that the Camino has gotten so popular, I happened to hit a bulge of pilgrims around the same time I was on parts of the Camino, so that you would find out you would get to towns that would be quite booked up. So you learn as you're going. I didn't book anything ahead, but once I got there, and you're kind of always planning. What was great is you have the flexibility when you're going independently like I did and I went on my own, that you can decide where you're going to walk each day. But generally, I would know that day where my goal was for the next day. So if I was finding during that particular cycle of time I was in that there was a bulge of pilgrims and that some of the towns were really getting booked up, and where I was hoping to stay that next night was not a very big town and didn't have a whole lot of pilgrim hostel options, then I would often call ahead or book ahead to at least that I knew I had a room waiting for me when I got there. So you could kind of play it by ear, but I would say I probably booked ahead about half the time, a day, 1 day ahead.
Is this trail like many where they always make room for you even if everything's full?
What you hear is, and I actually had that experience, that the people, if you get to a town and it's really filled, and that maybe there's not a town a close way, another 2 or 3 miles away, that people will work with you and figure things out. Maybe another pilgrim who's got their own room, but it's got 2 beds will hear about it and go, wait, you can come share with me. One day in Rabanal, I got there. I was trying to make reservations ahead, but no one was answering my calls. And so I arrived into town a little bit nervous, going, oh my gosh, because I knew I wanted to stay there and there wasn't a lot of other options. And so I went to one of the albergues there, and the man at the desk said, I'm sorry, our regular dorm rooms are filled up, but we've got an overflow room where you can sleep on the floor. We've got a mattress. Will that be okay? I said, are you kidding? I'll take anything. Well, it turned out to be a huge, huge room they ended up putting 7 mattresses spread out across the floor. It was way more comfortable than if I had been in the dorm room. So it was a great experience. It's kind of like the Camino. There's a term that we use, the Camino provides, is that when you have a need, things seem to open up and you get taken care of. Someone figures something out. So yes, I think generally things work out. In worst scenario, there are taxi services. And if, you really, you happen to hit just a horrible time, there's absolutely nothing available, and you're really there late in the end of the day, you can always take a taxi to a next big town and stay there for the night, and potentially take a taxi back the next morning to where you started left the Camino, so that you're doing the full thing. So there's always options. You get really creative, and that's where pilgrims can help. You kind of learn the pilgrim world and how things work, and you get a lot of advice from fellow pilgrims. So yes, lodging can be challenging, but it always does seem to work out.
Is there anything I did not ask you that you'd like to convey to our listeners?
Actually, yes, you did ask about terrain, and let me actually mention that, and I didn't get to that last time. As I mentioned, when you're doing the full Camino, the full French way, it's as I mentioned, the meseta or the mesa, which is more of a flat section, is the middle third of the Camino. So the first third, when you're starting in France in Saint-Jean-Pied-de-Port, going over the Pyrenees, all the way to the town of Burgos, that is an area of both mountainy and hilly area. Then you hit the flats, and then that last third of the Camino is where you start getting back into hills and then some mountains. So you have a real variety. You definitely have hills and some mountains, and there's a lot of up and down. And what's great is the Camino is occasionally you're on some roads, and if it's a bigger, more busy road, they usually made a path that is like a dirt kind of gravel path that parallels the road, often sometimes tree lined, that you're at least able to walk not on the road but along the side. But then many times if you're going through little villages, you're on the paved road, but it's a small little road that there's very little traffic on. And then a lot of the Camino's on kind of dirt, gravel tracks through the woods. Sometimes it's rocky. So there's times you feel like you're just walking on pavement. Other times you're on like a real hike where it's uneven terrain that's dirt and rocky, and you're going up and down, and it's a hike, and there's glad you have hiking poles. So it's a real variety of terrain for someone. So it's more than just a flat walk in town. There is definitely hiking aspects, but nothing technical. I mean, there's nothing that's, a major technical, but I think when someone's training for the Camino, you really want to do some hiking so that you're comfortable with uneven terrain for just your footing. And definitely there's times that hiking poles really do come in handy.
Is the trail easy to navigate?
Yes, yes. It's the famous, you always see the pictures, the famous yellow arrows. And so the Camino Frances is the most, since it's the most popular and it's really the number one, there's a huge pilgrim infrastructure all along it. So now there's great facilities of lodging, of towns with cafes, lots of people doing it. So there's lots of social aspects, as well as the fact that it's very, very well marked with the yellow arrows. And they're very creative. So you get quite good at looking for the yellow arrows that are pointing you in the right direction. Plus, you do use your guidebooks. I used Brierley, which is kind of the main Bible, and his book has got very detailed trail maps for each day. So between Brierley's trail maps of kind of knowing what I was going to be doing that day, how far from each place, how far to the next cafe, how far to the next water fountain, and then being able to match that up with the yellow arrows along the trail. Usually, I would get turned around a little bit, but it wasn't too bad. So it's pretty well marked, which is great.
How do you determine where you're going to travel next and what's on your bucket list?
Yeah, well, actually, my next trip is going back to Spain. I am going to go back. I did not expect this when I first plan to walk my half Camino, the second half, of course. I had no intention of going back into Spain to do the first half. And even as I finished the Camino in Santiago, I still wasn't sure if I'd want to go back. But about 3 weeks after I got home, all of a sudden it just hit me. It's like, I've got to go back. I've got to go see the first half. I've got to experience that part of the Camino and see the Pyrenees and see the towns of Pamplona and the Basque country. So I'm going back this coming May, to go back and walk my first half and experience that. So that's certainly next on my list. I'm not sure after that what's on the adventure bucket list. I've done so many different things, so I have to think about what might be next after that.
And Janet, you travel so much that you've actually become a travel blogger and run Planet Janet. Can you tell us a little bit about that, please?
You bet. Well, it's Planet Janet Travels. That's officially the trademark. But yes, I became a travel blogger as my full-time gig about a year and a half ago, because all these years I've done many different things, but travel's always been that unifying passion. And as I've gotten to the point, I back in 2001, I did my first photography tour to China and Tibet, and absolutely fell in love with that type of exotic travel. I loved being in cultures, China and particularly in Tibet, that were so different, so exotic, that I went, oh my gosh, my soul was on fire. I just loved being around that, in a place that was so, so different. And that's really like adventure travel, honestly. And so I knew I wanted to do more of that. So I came home from that point and started, instead of just doing Europe, which is a wonderful place, I started really branching out and seeing other parts of the world. going on Africa safaris, I just had a chance this past year to go to Antarctica for the first time, done the Galapagos. And so I've just been Asia. I've been adding more and more of these just incredible destinations that I've been wanting to see out of my own just desire to explore the world and meet the people that inhabit it. And I started getting more and more of these trips, and more people were following me on I would have email reports and do some slideshows about my trips. It became clear that that's really what I was known for and what my passion was. So that's why I decided to really make this my full-time avocation now, to share my travels around the world, but to really inform and inspire my readers and my audience so they can get out and travel the world even more widely than they have, and to do it joyfully and confidently. And I'm really aiming at fellow kind of baby boomers, sort of the midlife and above, to get out, because there's so much of the world. And Kate, I know you know how this is. There's so much of the world to see and experience. And, we're not the young 20-somethings that have 6 decades of travel ahead of them. Our clock's ticking, and there's a lot of the world to see, and I've got a lot I want to be doing. So I'm wanting to encourage people to get out and just, travel as if your best life depended on it. So that's my travel, Planet Janet Travels. So I do blog post stories about my travels, and I have a website so people can come and see all my different blog posts. And I have a weekly newsletter where I talk about my most recent favorite trip and give some travel tips.
Of course, I'll have the links to Planet Janet Travels on the show notes on the website, in addition to her blog post on the Camino. I want to thank Janet for spending so much time with us, teaching us about the El Camino. It sounds like a trip. I now got to add that to my bucket list. Be sure to download the free travel planning cheat sheet on the El Camino that you can find at the website at activetraveladventures.com, episode number 6, or you'll get this automatically if you register for the monthly newsletter. It includes all the details that you need in order to plan this trip, whether you do it by yourself or with a tour, and all sorts of helpful hints and information about traveling in Spain. I hope you enjoyed this episode and are enjoying the Active Travel Adventures podcast. If you are, I would appreciate a ratings and review in iTunes. It'll take you about 2 minutes, and it does help give me some feedback and helps others find the program. Thanks so much for your time. I'll see you in 2 weeks. Until next time, adventure on.